In the year 2023, Sonic Riders is an often forgotten part of series history, even though in my opinion there's something really cool about Sonic and friends taking up a hoverboard racing competition. Sonic Riders has 3 games, starting with what I think is one of the coolest racing games I've played, all the way to one of the worst games I've ever played in my life, and yes, I've played the whole thing. This video is going to be a compilation of my coverage of the Sonic Riders series with some minor adjustments for the flow of the video. And my original Zero Gravity review had an issue where the footage was 30 FPS by mistake. So I'm taking this opportunity as a chance to do a remastered cut of the Zero Gravity review, making this the best version of the video to ever exist. But with all that said, this is my Sonic Riders retrospective.
This game is a picture-perfect example of how I was as a kid, or rather, just in general. When I got this game on the PS2 back in the day, I also had like Gran Turismo something or other. I don't even know, I never played it. I mean, it's racing with cars. I don't want to play that. But Sonic on hoverboards? Sign me up. I played the multiplayer of this game a lot way back when. To be honest, I didn't even know it had a story mode for the longest time, because when you boot up the game, the first thing in the menu is the normal race option. This is how you access the multiplayer. The story mode is beneath that. You could then ask me, why didn't you just use your eyeballs and read the words on the screen? To that I will say, I don't know, it was 2006 or whatever. I might be the only person with this experience, but I can say it was a really cool surprise to find that this game had a story mode after having already played it a lot. Speaking of which, the story is set up similarly to Sonic Adventure 2, where you have the hero side story and the New Babylon side of the story. I can explain it in a moment. What's different from SA2 is that only the hero side is unlocked at the start. The other side you need to be unlocked by beating the hero side. I always felt like the devs of SA2 intended you to play the hero side story first anyway, so it doesn't bother me in Riders. The plot begins with Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles looking for a lost Chaos Emerald when these 3 goons emerge from a window on hoverboards called Extreme Gear. These folks have stolen the Chaos Emerald, this being a new group of rivals introduced for this game. The Babylon Rogues, consisting of Jet the Hawk, Wave the Swallow, and Storm the Albatross, each serving as a counter for the characters on Team Sonic like the dynamic from Sonic Adventure 2. The Rogues get away, but the next day Sonic and Co learn that Eggman is starting the X-World Grand Prix with the Rogues already having entered it. Entering the competition being the heroes' chance to get back at their new enemies. The price of admission is 1 Chaos Emerald per person. And yeah, that doesn't set off a single red flag in anyone's mind. Spoiler alert, it was another Eggman scheme to get the 7 emeralds and the treasure hidden on Babylon Garden. Yeah, didn't see that one coming. Having said that, I find this story really entertaining. Having a big cast of characters is part of that. You just get to see them bounce off each other in ways I find entertaining, like Knuckles getting angrily confused by Tails explaining how extreme gears work. There are a lot of cartoony staples and sound effects that are put to good use in these cutscenes, which further adds to their enjoyment. Helps the overall story that it follows a fairly predictable but effective structure for how to do a Sonic rival, as Jet starts off way better than Sonic at extreme gear usage, but you almost beat him at the end until he cheats to win.
Ah, the dirt suits you so well!
Now you really want to rub it in his face in the final race. Doing that unlocks the Babylon story, and here you see the same plot from their perspective. It even begins before the hero side version like in SA2. But now we get extra insight into what was going on. In the hero side story, you just see Wave completely tear down Tails' work, but in the Babylon story, you see that she only did that for show, when in reality she was actually impressed by Tails' gear craftsmanship. Hence why she put a bomb on it, informing what you already saw in the hero side story at the end. After the race at Sky Road, you also get what would amount to a last story segment in the other games, but it's just after the last race, where the treasure of Babylon Garden is blocked by a giant genie that goes... You play as Sonic one last time to beat it, and once you do, Eggman shows up to claim the treasure, which turns out to be a carpet.
Undoubtedly, this carpet will be in high demand from all around the world, but what's this? No way! I went to the trouble of holding the World Grand Prix for this? I can't believe I just wasted my time for this piece of junk!
Yeah, his whole plan was a waste of time. What a goon. Now, I just went into why I enjoy the story, but it's certainly not executed to perfection, which starts with the animations. It's certainly fine, I mean lip sync is in order, models are okay, it's just that things look a little stiff when compared to what Ratchet and Jack were doing, also having some clipping issues too. Having just played the old Ratchet games again makes this pretty obvious. Sonic character proportions are hard to work with. I don't think it's something that can't be overcome, but take this part where Amy winks at Sonic, for example. This just reminds you of how the Una-eye look some of these characters have makes expressions like this a little awkward in animation. But the biggest problem I think the story suffers from is the fact that of all the 4Kids era games, this has easily the worst vocal performance of any of them.
Oh, new competition!
Like I said, I like these voices for most of the characters, but the direction just feels so off and wooden.
That's cool! Sonic!
Making a lot of cutscenes more cringeworthy than they probably were intended to be.
Even without wings, I can still fly! Right?
And then you have Jason Griffith as Jet, and
He may be the fastest creature on the ground, but in the air, with me and my extreme gear, he's just a joke!
why would they have him sound like this? Who talks like that? Anyway, the acting isn't helped by the weak translation. You won't have any trouble interpreting what's going on, but
Not just a race, but a special race to see who's the fastest.
what is that line? A special race to see who's the fastest, as opposed to a regular race. When discussing the larger game, the graphics are nothing to write home about either. I get you're supposed to be whizzing by the areas as fast as possible, but I can't help but notice how bad some of the textures have held up, using really low poly or just straight up pixelated assets. Compared to something like Jack X, this game just kind of feels low budget in its presentation. By 6th gen standards, I don't think it's the worst of the worst. I mean, it has full cutscenes after all, but it's noticeable that this game has aged visually in a way that I don't think Sonic Heroes even has. The CG cutscenes aren't particularly numerous, but the ones we get are great. I just love action-heavy Sonic cutscenes, so I'm already sold on that when watching the intro, but the amount of detail put into the models is just fantastic. Love this shot in the ending, it just looks so cool. Which describes the whole aesthetic pretty well. Hideaki Moriya and Yuji Uekawa served as the art directors for this game, creating a new art style instead of just using the traditional one from the Adventure and Advance games that Uekawa had already done. The most defining aspect of this art style being the solid color with lined shading and this cool chalk-looking outline around the characters. Just look at Sonic, who's entirely shaded in this dark blue. That kind of shading is making its way into some of the newer Sonic art, and like I said, I think it looks great. Although my heart still lies with that adventure style, which we did get official art of the Babylon Rogues in eventually. But back to the Riders look, it's just really slick and colorful when seeing these characters together. Just look at the Japanese box art. This game being another case of whoever does the localization just thinking Americans obviously don't want this stylized box art, they want CG renders. But regardless, I've always loved the opening movie that's animated in this 2D style. I mean, it just has such confidence in itself, watching the core characters race while doing cool tricks to this banging music. Putting some character in it as well, like when Storm attacks Tails and Sonic just goes back for him. What a lad this Sonic guy is. I mentioned how banging the opening music Sonic Speed Riders was, and so I figured I should also mention that it and the closing credits, Catch Me If You Can, were both done by Rumblebee, who did the soundtrack for Sonic and the Secret Rings, which was also a bop and a half. The soundtrack of Riders in general is just good to listen to while tearing up the racetracks. The only issue I could ever take with it just being that I want more of it, but I can talk about that later. Now, the title says that this game is the perfect Sonic spin-off, which then brings up the discussion of what I mean by that. Developers can make whatever games they want to with whatever IPs, but looking back at the history of Sonic, I have to say that I think the kart racer was never a super strong fit for the series. Mario and Crash obviously do it, so you'd want Sonic to compete with that. However, I just think a game like Sonic Riders makes more sense. I mean, Sonic on a snowboard has been a thing since Ice Cap Zone in Sonic 3. When Sonic Riders came out, Sonic Adventure's too cool for school attitude was still the thing the whole franchise revolved around, and a spin-off with hoverboards where you pull off sick tricks is such a great fit. To summarize Sonic Riders, you pick whichever character you want, and the goal is to beat the competition in 3 laps around the track. Yeah, I know that's kind of obvious, but you have to start somewhere, okay? While racing, your extreme gear has this energy bar on the side of the screen that when depleted will see you running to find the nearest pit stop to fill your board with energy. Pressing the B button will allow you to boost, something that will consume more of your energy than just riding normally would have. To increase the gauge's maximum capacity, you have to collect 30 and then 60 rings, which will give your boost attack more power. But if you get hit, you go back to level 1. To fill up your gauge, there are these pit stops I just mentioned, but I try not to rely on these because they'll stop you in place for a few seconds, giving the other racers valuable time to get ahead of you. If you ever get behind, you can rely on the turbulence generated by the leading player's board and do tricks on it and use that as a chance to catch up. Like I said, this game just has very interesting mechanics. Most racers have items the players in the back can use to get in the front. Even Jack X is the obnoxiously undodgeable Peacemaker item. But Riders just has its own systems entirely. A lot of good risk versus reward gameplay in there, like the boost system I just went into, or even how the levels begin with these gates you have to run through. Hit it too early and you get shocked and put in last place, but if you do it too late, you'll probably be towards the back of the group anyway. Run at it with just the right timing and the game will have unbelievable appear on the screen as you just start the race at the top of the pile. But the overall goal of the game is to keep your energy meter up by performing tricks off of jump ramps. Here, another Sonic Adventure era concept is put to great use in this game. the ranking system from Sonic Adventure 2. When you land after pulling tricks, the game will score you on it. The higher your rank upon landing, the more energy you'll gain. To get the top rank, X, you have to jump really high in the air and pull off consistent and varied tricks from the start of the jump to the landing, and you have to make a perfect landing. If you fail the landing, you get a C rank, which doesn't refill any of your energy meter, and you just killed off your momentum while doing it. Every time you hit a jump ramp, you just get a hit of dopamine because you want to charge up your jump just the right amount while also carrying enough speed into the jump to be able to do faster tricks. And then you really hope you can make the landing. It's so rewarding to do each and every time. Although I never got these certain ramps that don't have the same flow to them as the regular ones. I know that sounds weird, but take Ice Factory for example. You get this big ramp at the beginning, but then there's this other one right after that where you can charge your jump just the same, but the tricks will be slower and floatier. These floatier ramps are all over the game in every track, and I just don't know what's the deal with them. But that's not a big issue. The trick ranking system alone is why I find this game so fun, but there's still a lot of other stuff to mess around with as well. The game has a pretty decent roster of characters, and they're divided into 3 categories: speed, fly, and power. Something that had become a staple of the series at this point following Sonic Heroes and Sonic Advance 3. Speed-type characters like Sonic, Jet, or Shadow can take advantage of grind rail shortcuts where you jump on a rail and go above the track itself. You have to press the jump button a second time to actually land on the rail though, so keep that in mind. Fly-type characters like Tails, Wave, or Cream will reach these large ramp shortcuts and they'll automatically fly off of them and go through the rings in the sky that will increase their speed in the air for a short bit. And power-type characters like Knuckles, Storm, or Dr. Eggman will bash through certain obstacles to get a shortcut. The biggest difference between these types is their shortcuts, and each one might be better suited for different tracks. Like how I did a really bad job on Night Chase as Jet because these police cars driving through the street, but as a power-type character you can just plow through them. So you need to experiment to decide which formation works best for each track. But each one has a dedicated shortcut on each track so nobody feels left out. Whenever I play this game, I just stick to Sonic and Shadow, so my routes just revolve around their shortcuts in most of the tracks. All this warrants a discussion around what I think is the biggest talking point surrounding Sonic Riders, and that is its accessibility. Sonic Riders has a lot going on from a mechanics point of view, but for most players that just doesn't really land because the game doesn't teach basically any of it in an organic fashion. With a game like Crash Team Racing, I'm sure there's a skill ceiling, but when playing it for a video in 2020 for the first time, I jumped into it with ease. In the case of Sonic Riders, like I just said, you have to know to press jump a second time to actually land on the grind rails with speed characters. The game tries to ease you into it since the first 2 races in the story mode only require you having gotten 3rd place or higher to progress, but clearly that doesn't account for the larger issue. I think there definitely is something to this argument that the game doesn't teach its mechanics well. However, I'm not bothered by that because, I don't know, I've been playing this since 2006 or whatever, so it's just not something that gets in the way of my ability to have fun with it. However, this problem does need to be addressed. Just when making this video, there are mechanics I learned about for the first time. By watching the tutorial video in the options menu, I learned by pressing L and R at the same time you'll toss wind at your enemies, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't know that one. Or look at some of the shortcuts reached by jumping high enough off of a ramp. Sky Road is one of the hardest tracks in the game. Whenever I reach this point in the Babylon story, I get my ass kicked because some of the racers can just reach this high ledge that I can't. When talking to the boys, Jeb is just like, yeah, if you hold down the analog stick, you jump higher from ramps. And I didn't know that. I tried it out, and now I can't not get first place in this race. King K then tells me about holding forward on the analog stick to go further and not reaching certain shortcuts. Who knew? I'm not trying to say I'm an expert, so therefore my learning new things is a con. I'm just saying it's definitely worth mentioning that things that feel pretty basic are just kinda things you have to know, either by experience or someone telling you it. The kind of thing that definitely takes away from a game in a critical sense, but not in an enjoyment sense because I think the game is really fun. Looking past what it takes to get there, this game has a decently high skill ceiling, and those are my favorite kinds of games. The ones where learning and applying its mechanics are part of the reward you get by playing the game. Think of why I praise games like MGS3 or DMC5, it's the same kind of thing. Pulling off the tricks of the analog stick is never not satisfying. It feels like you have control over the pace of the game, and when you're good at it, it feels good to play. Look at the leads I was pulling over my opponents. I don't know how else to say this, that's just satisfying. But like I alluded to earlier, I just think there isn't enough of it. Sonic Riders has 5 tracks by default: Metal City, Splash Canyon, Egg Factory, Green Cave, and Sand Ruins. You unlock Babylon Garden at the end of the Hero Side story and the Digital Dimension at the end of the Babylon story. The Babylon campaign sees you playing through nighttime or inverted versions of the Hero Side tracks, like instead of Metal City, it's Night Chase. Instead of Egg Factory, a lava level, you get Ice Factory. These tracks are all different, but they reuse assets from other stages to cut down the time needed to come up with new aesthetics. This is fine, but I just think Sonic Riders doesn't have enough core content, a similar issue to Sonic R, actually. While making this video, I kept coming back to the game to get more footage of races just because it's fun to play, but there aren't that many tracks to work with, so the footage just becomes more of the same. This is why they put in extra modes and unlockable characters, such as Shadow, Rouge, Cream, and Eggman. Shadow and Eggman introducing new gameplay types to the game as Shadow rides hover skates and Eggman has a moped. You can then allow the other characters to use these vehicles if you think it's cool. I usually give Shadow an unlockable board. I mean, his being on hover skates kind of feels like cheating. It's like the Shadow version of the ancient meme, why doesn't Sonic just run on foot when that's faster? Speaking of which, you get rings for completing races and you can spend them on new boards. This is pretty tough to work with because the stats are barely comprehensible to me, and apparently the stats are all lies anyway, so that's nice. Playing as Dr. Eggman in this game is a riot. I mean, you're leading the pack doing tricks as Eggman riding a moped, and Omochow, the announcer, is taking it completely seriously.
Eggman has just established a new track record.
You can turn off that announcing dialogue in the options menu if you wish, but I could take it either way, which also goes for Jack X and Ratchet Deadlocked. Weirdly, Dr. Eggman is voiced by Mike Pollock in this game like usual,
I've had many, many dreadful encounters with this pest.
but the in-game grunts for Eggman are reused clips from Dean Bristow for the adventure games.
Do you think you can beat me?
Was Mike Pollock just busy this week and they couldn't get him back to do some grunts? I don't know, it's very weird of them to do. But back to the unlockables. You can also unlock characters from other Sega properties like Knights and Super Monkey Ball and Sega-themed stages. Super Sonic's even playable if you clear enough missions. New stages are definitely good, but unlocking them with missions would take a really long time. I say would because, you might notice this footage is on Dolphin and not my Wii, like the clearly 480p clip on the screen right now. Getting a gold rank on the first mission in Storm's list alone took countless retries. You need to be pixel perfect in order to get that, which I found satisfying in a way, but not something I want to keep doing for hours with the other missions. I mean, I could barely jump off of this ramp as Tails, which made me throw in the towel for doing missions. Again, it's more content, but not content that comes in the form of racing on new stages, which is all I really want. The biggest problem with the game is that it lacked content and was not very accessible for players not interested in putting a lot of time into it when compared to far more accessible racing games. These are two problems that I feel are very easy to solve, while still making sure the appeal of the original game is retained. Like a more in-depth tutorial where you get to practice the moves the game teaches you, and from an external point of view, give the devs the time and money needed to have more tracks to play on. Well, you read the title of the video. I do not think Sonic Riders Zero Gravity does the simple job it had. Instead, I think Zero Gravity kills a lot of the appeal of the first game. Before getting into that, I should mention, this game released on the Wii in early 2008, and similar to the Wii port of Sonic Unleashed, this game also got a port to the PlayStation 2. As of the 6th generation consoles, this one outlived all of its competition and was still viable by 2008. Like Sonic Unleashed, there isn't much to say about the PS2 port besides it having significantly downgraded textures, the Wii version being the true Zero Gravity experience. Now, when starting this discussion of why Zero Gravity was a disappointing sequel, I think it's best to begin with the positives. First of all, the music in this game is even better than the first game, with more memorable themes for each of the tracks. A fantastic vocal theme in Ungraffitify, a remix of Catch Me With You Can that's even better than the original, and instrumental mixes of these two tracks in the options menu. When getting into more substantive matters, the game is indeed much easier to play for newcomers, especially with the right setup. The Wii had a plethora of control options, Zero Gravity allowing you to play with the Wii remote on its side like Sonic and the Secret Rings, or playing with the remote upright. As a kid, the rule from Secret Rings had not changed. I still completely ignored whatever this was supposed to mean and carried on. In fact, this misunderstanding of how to play the game made it so that I could never get past the first race, because I'm literally not playing it right. Because of that, I had an infinitely easier time with the PS2 release because of the traditional button controls. However, if you have a GameCube controller, this will work with Zero Gravity, and I think this allows for the most comfortable playthrough. The gears feel a lot heavier in this game, but controlling it is simple. Move the analog sticks in whatever direction you need, press A to jump, press Y to change gears, more on that later, press R to gravity dive, and B with the analog stick to turn tight corners. These gravity moves are pretty fun because of the way the music stops for a second and picks up the second you let go of the button. It's pretty satisfying. This game simplifies aspects of the controls, like not needing to press jump twice to land on rails. Instead, just jumping in their vicinity does the job. The game has the same core roster of characters as you unlock Shadow, Cream, Rouge, and Eggman like the first game. But now, Silver the Hedgehog from Sonic 06 and Blaze the Cat from Sonic Rush have made their way into the Riders series, two very welcome additions to the roster. Silver being established as a flight-type character. It makes sense, it's just interesting because he's the only hedgehog in the series to not be a speed-type character. You can also unlock two extra stages, 80s Boulevard and 90s Boulevard, as you tear through streets, buses, and subway tunnels as Sonic and crew. Much more fun stages to work with than the Sega-themed ones from the first Riders game. To be honest, besides cool unlockables, good music, and accessible controls, I think this game is worse than the first in just about every aspect. Let's start with the most important thing about Riders' gameplay, the trick system. You remember, you'd charge up your jump and go flying as you spin the analog stick to do cool tricks. You'd make the perfect landing and get the X ranking. In Zero Gravity, this aspect of the game was completely removed. How tricks work is that you press jump on a ramp and you must time your jump to your point on the ramp to get the highest airtime and the most amount of tricks done. The tricks themselves being completely automated. If you time it poorly, you get a C, and if you time it right, you can get as high as an X. Getting X is still satisfying, but not because I really deserved it, since I'm not sure what the timing required even is. I just press the jump button and hope I get lucky. Tricks aren't nearly as fun when they're pre-baked animations that play from jumping off of ramps instead of actually pulling those tricks off yourself. To make it worse, they also removed boosting. The first game had this system where you could boost, but that would take away from your energy meter where you could refill it by doing cool tricks and increase it by collecting rings. The energy bar is still in this game, but this only controls the gravity dive where you fly forward over obstacles and bounce off of walls to go even faster. It's kind of cool to do in these dedicated segments of the levels, especially when it helps you pull out a win, but the system in Riders 1 is just so much more fun. This is also manifested in turning corners, which instead of having to manage your speed and timing, you just press a button and corner turned. To be fair, this system is used to access certain shortcuts on the track, but I just don't find the game fun to play, so therefore it doesn't really matter. But speaking of shortcuts, these are also nerfed thanks to the gear change system. You still get rewards for collecting rings, the second tier of rewards being allowing you to access shortcuts, grinding on rails for speed gears, flying through rings for flight gears, and crashing through obstacles for power bikes. I said the type of board because of the fact that the shortcuts are tied to the boards themselves and not the characters. This isn't terrible, it gives you a motivation to experiment with extra boards since maybe you like certain shortcuts over others but want to just play as Sonic and Shadow. It's a fine idea, but I just don't like needing to be at level 2 in order to use a shortcut. It forces you onto a main and slower path for the first lap of the race, and I just can't get down with that. So what good I could say about Zero Gravity is really small potatoes. There's a playable tutorial, that's nice. The unlockable boards are unique and look cool. There are more tracks in this game. The Babylon stages in the first Riders game were just copy-pasted from the Hero Side story. This time, the Babylon tracks have more distinct layouts, while still reusing assets for areas that were already cool, like Megalo Station, Botanical Kingdom, Tempest Waterway, and the Gigan Rocks. But again, I don't want to play Zero Gravity because it's really boring. This was something I felt from the moment I started playing to the second I turned it off when I was done capturing footage. I think aesthetically, Zero Gravity is a cool follow-up to Riders 1, but mechanically it just fails because of all the things that made the first game fun to play on a moment-to-moment basis are just cut from the game, which makes it really dull to play. I went into my Modern Sonic Stories video from 2018 thinking I would have something to say about how well done the plot in this game was, but really, I have next to nothing to say about this, too. I really enjoy the first cutscene of the Hero Side story, I like the tense atmosphere it's got going on. However, the plot doesn't really entertain me like the first game did, and what actually happens isn't even that interesting. Basically, Eggman tries to control a bunch of robots using the new MacGuffin, the Arcs of the Cosmos that have fallen from the sky as the heroes and Babylonians get involved with the Arcs and the robots. When Eggman fails, a giant robot monster is unleashed in Babylon Garden that you have to stop, and the end. To the game's credit, the final boss was much more difficult than Riders 1, where I don't even know if there even was a failure state. Here, you're in serious competition with the other racers to beat the monster. I don't know why that is, but you are, and I actually timed out my first try. Once that's done, you get the ending, and like the first game, I think it's really cool and well animated.
Sonic!
They don't make them like they used to. This game's ending being really nostalgic for me, because back in the day when I first started watching YouTube in 2008 or so, I was listening to Sonic music and Sonic music videos, and watching endings of Sonic games I hadn't beat, like Sonic Unleashed or Adventure 1, watching cutscenes from games I had played, such as this one. Part of why this ending stands out in my mind as much as it does, I'd assume. But the rest of the story is very boring. Most cutscenes just see characters standing around expositing, and it's just dull. Characters standing around expositing in a game released as late as 2008 is going to get criticized by me regardless of it being a 4Kids era game or meta era or whatever. So instead of focusing on the story, my mind drifts to other things that grab my attention more than the plot itself, like, why is it that the game sees you racing in the story mode when it's not a World Grand Prix we're competing in? Seriously, even when your goals are to escape, you have to get in first place 3 rounds on a track. This game establishes that the rogues and Babylon Garden itself come down from the sky because the rogues are descendants of aliens from another planet, when Riders 1 says that Babylon Garden rises from the ground and that the rogues are descendants of genies. Whatever, I guess it could be both. I can't say I really care because while I enjoy the setting and characters of Riders, I never considered these games canon to the series because Eggman now just has the leeway to open up a company and Knuckles is just established as a treasure hunter now and the characters just always dressed ready for races like it's a normal part of the world. Could be canon. I mean, Heroes already has Grand Metropolis, which is kind of similar to Future City from these games. And Unleashed saw Eggman having the resources to build Eggman Land in the first place, and Colors saw the Interstellar Amusement Park, so it could have happened, but I tend to ignore the Riders games from a canon sense. On a brighter note, I am very entertained by Eggman being so stealthy that he can sneak onto the Babylon ship, walk into a room with 3 people in it, literally steal what's on Jet's desk, and get away laughing. And I buy every single aspect of that. Eggman is as fast as Sonic and has Batman-level stealth abilities. How could you not be entertained by the antics of this guy? But anyway, I mentioned the World Grand Prix a moment ago. The hero side story just cuts off on this note.
See you at the World Grand Prix.
I remember being really hyped for that. Hindsight is 2020. I don't know, I really don't have anything else to say on this game, I just think it's boring. I don't hate Zero Gravity, I just don't care for it because all the cool stuff from the original isn't in it. It doesn't play terribly, but I just don't enjoy playing it and don't really plan on coming back to it anytime soon. Like I said last time, the Riders series is a really devoted fan base, which is great because when Sonic fans put their minds together, the result is some really spectacular stuff. This is what has gotten us the re-graffitified mod of Zero Gravity from Extreme Gear Labs, which sought out to change the game and make it more fun. First, by adding netplay, allowing you to play the game online, gear changes not being needed to access shortcuts, types being limited to characters, drifting is back, boosting returns via a repurpose of an item that allows you to run on the ground, therefore allowing you to access these spring shortcuts. However, this did lead to me getting ridiculous leads on my racing opponents, but I did enjoy this mod much more than the regular game. Netplay gives it a lot more replay value as well. But that brings me into the discussion of Sonic Riders DX, another Extreme Gear Labs production that built off the existing Sonic Riders Tournament Edition. This version of the game comes with a texture pack if you want it, but the main advantages are the rebalanced game mechanics and the netplay. Online games aren't usually my thing, but when playing with close friends it's an absolute riot, since we all know how to play Riders and can therefore have a great time playing it together. Something made possible with the DX version.
No! The turbulence made me go into the lava!
Wait, no! I'm going backwards! No!
Oh no! Come on, come on!
Oh! No! What was that time difference?
4 milliseconds.
Oh, that was so close. It's really fun to play, and now I'm really looking forward to whatever comes next from the team.
And I'm inserting this as post-production for the compilation cut. Riders DX version 2.0 has been released since this original upload, and I thought it was great with the amount of new characters it added and all the extra graphical details and extra music. It was great fun.
I'll leave a link to the trailer in the description, and there you'll be able to get the link to the Discord server where the mod is being hosted. With all that said, this being the last real Sonic Riders game we ever got makes me kinda sad. I feel like the idea of Sonic hoverboards has so much potential, but the sequels to the original just squandered the idea. We could talk about Free Riders another day, like I said, but this game being playable certainly doesn't give it an excuse. They could have made the game more accessible in the ways they did while not removing what worked about the original. They could even keep the automated tricks, but imagine a Zero Gravity with an option to turn it off and allow you to play it like the original game. That alone just makes Zero Gravity much better than it is in the final product. I just feel let down by this game because, like I said, a sequel to Riders could work so well, but this one has the music and the aesthetic right, but then it cuts down on the cartoony moments that made the first game entertaining, the plot structure that made you want to get better at and see the game through, and the mechanics that still allow Riders 1 to be so fun. This is why I just don't care for this game as much as I used to, when, like I said, this outcome was avoidable. Zero Gravity was released on the PS2 and the Nintendo Wii, with that being the main version of the game. So while you could thankfully play it with a controller, one of its main focuses was trying to tie into the Wii's motion gimmicks. The Nintendo Wii was the talk of the town back when it was released because of its motion controls, and when something is popular, other companies are going to try and get in on it. For example, Sony released the PlayStation Move for the PlayStation 3 in 2010, which was pretty shameless with how it went about copying the Wii. Although hey, that did lead to a crossover between Sly Cooper, Ratchet & Clank, and Jak and Daxter, three of my favorite franchises, but that's a story for another day, I promise. Microsoft also released their own motion-controlled peripheral in 2010 for the Xbox 360, the Xbox Kinect, which I'd say was trying to at least be more original in its shameless effort to grab the Wii audience, as the Kinect was this giant camera that you'd plug into the back of your Xbox 360 that could track the movements of your entire body. However, it didn't really work because while some games were given favorable reviews, many were slammed by critics, and the device itself got some positive reception, but its $150 price tag compared to the $200 Xbox 360 was a pretty tough sell. However, Sega, in their typical fashion, saw a flashy new device and knew Sonic had to be on it. So one of the launch games of the Xbox Kinect was Sonic Free Riders, a game that took the Riders series gameplay and tried to adapt it to this full-bodied motion-controlled gimmick. Like many of the other Kinect games, Sonic Free Riders was slammed by critics for its frustrating, unintuitive, and unresponsive gameplay. Amongst Sonic fans, it's an interesting one because it's definitely one of the most infamous Sonic games of all time. And that's saying something because that's a pretty exhaustive list at this point. I mean, you take one look at people playing the game and the game itself and you can just tell that it's not good or that fun. I'm not speaking in hindsight here either. I'm talking all the way back to when it was announced. The first E3 show I ever saw was 2010, and that was because I had my eyes glued to the coverage for Sonic Colors on both the Wii and DS, Sonic 4 Episode 1, and of course, Sonic Free Riders. But this one just looked off in a way the other games did not. Motion-based games were prone to looking unfinished at E3 demos, and while the game didn't look jank because it was unfinished, it just had problems from its inherent design, like the part where the demo guy is trying to drag the icon into the corner of the screen and he has to do it a few times. Or when he tries doing a trick and the game registers a punch by accident. That sort of thing. So the stage was not set for a good game, and when it came out, it was met with the reception you'd expect. Despite all that, I've never played it before today. I'd imagine it being a Kinect exclusive made this a game a lot of fans skipped when they might have tried it otherwise. When I was a kid, I watched the game's cutscenes on YouTube. I watched the trailers and the pre-release footage. I managed to get my hands on all the action figures Jazzwares had done for this game, and I was pretty happy about that because I always thought Sonic Riders would have made for cool figures when I was a kid playing the first two, and then my prayers were answered when this game dropped. But yeah, besides that, I was content with not actually playing it myself. Watching people play it was quite enough. When I first conceptualized this Sonic retrospective, I don't think I ever planned on including it, but you know me, plans change. 21 months ago I figured, why not? I'll get this game off my bucket list and get it on eBay knowing I'd review it one day, and 18 months ago, back when I was working on my Shadow the Hedgehog review, I got a 360 copy of Sonic 06, and a used 360 so I could use it when reviewing Sonic 06 and Sonic Unleashed. That day I also got a Kinect for use in the inevitable Free Riders video, and 18 months later, we finally have gotten to it. In order to even play the game, I had to move my couch to a temporary new spot where it would be out of the way while I played. I then moved my chair and set up my tripod to where the chair used to be. Once the game was on, I was greeted with the Sega logo and said, "Oh, Sega's behind this one. Now I know it's good." And then I was off on Sonic Free Riders. What was it like now that I actually played it myself? Well, it was every bit as dreadful as it looks, and as you have no doubt heard by now. I said earlier that Free Riders was the kind of game where you could tell it didn't look pleasant just by watching footage of it, but playing it is a whole other thing. To start with the obvious, the controls, or lack thereof. To control a character that uses a board, you need to stand to the side, and whichever way you're facing is the direction the character will face, and by doing an about face, the character will switch to the opposite side of the board. To turn, you need to lean your body in whichever direction you need to go. To pick up speed, you need to raise your back leg and kick the air like you were trying to pick up speed in a skateboard. To jump off of ramps, you need to crouch and jump. To get more points, you need to spin to the other side in midair after a jump. On paper, it sounds demanding to have to do all these things in rapid succession, and it is, but in execution, it's a nightmare because the controls barely work in this game. This begins with a lengthy tutorial you can play, and even if it's time-consuming, I recommend doing it because you need to get to grips with the basics of this game before even daring to play the campaign. But as early as the tutorial, I noticed that when leaning back, Sonic or whoever I was playing with would fly in that direction, but when leaning forward, they'd barely move unless I was doing a full-on hinge. This really got on my nerves when the final races of Team Heroes and Team Rose's playthroughs require you to do tight corner turns right before the finish line. But there are countless examples of the controls just not working in this game. No better example than the menus. In order to get through the menus, you have to use the force on these icons and drag them to the edge of the screen. Half the time, the game would not detect my hands and I'd get really pissed. They picked the worst possible menu layout for this game they ever could have. A spinning wheel of icons that you rotate through. But while I'm flailing my arms around trying to get the thing to detect my hands, oops, I spun the wheel and now I'm trying to spin it back, but this just spins it forward again and I have to keep spinning until I land on what I wanted. And then drag that icon to where it belonged. But when looking at the actual racing element, on several occasions I would try to kick the air and somehow this would register as me switching sides on the board, which meant that to gain the speed I was trying to, I can either lower my foot that's in the air and try gaining speed with the new back foot because I need to face the opposite direction to be in line with the character, or just hope the game realizes I didn't even switch as it will then rapidly switch me back. You're able to reach out for these ring trails on the edges of lanes, and sometimes the game just would not respond to this as I'm awkwardly bumping into the invisible wall. I'd try to jump off of ramps and the game would not register my jumps and I'd get a C rank and a tiny bit of energy refill. So to jump in this game, you need to do a full body squat before the game even thinks about considering it legit, and even then, sometimes it wouldn't register the jump fast enough so I'd have spent the energy squatting and jumping and nothing came of it. I get that it sounds really stupid to say, but this game is physically demanding to play through, and yes, I played through the entire game from start to finish. While I started off laughing at the game's expense, it quickly stopped being funny as in order to play the game, you need to jump and squat and twist and turn and lean and wipe the screen and reach out and swim in rapid succession. It's genuinely exhausting. Over the 3 days it took me to beat this game, I got 8 hours of exercise in, and 6 of them came from this game. But that's not really a good thing because doing something like heavily leaning backwards while your legs are fully extended or outright leaping into the air and crashing down on the ground over and over and over and over again are just more likely to get you in physical pain than actually grow your muscles of resistance. Like I said, the fact that you'll be doing all of that is exhausting, and then the fact that it's a crapshoot as to whether or not it will work is doubly frustrating. Such as this part in Team Heroes' playthrough where all the controls just stopped working at once.
Why won't he do it? It is not responding! The game isn't responding!
Or this temple level in Team Dark's story. The ceiling will cave in and you have to do yet another full body squat to get through it, and sometimes it just does not work, and I'd be slowed down letting other racers get ahead of me. I was only able to play this game for 2 hours at a time, and that's because after 120 minutes of putting up with these bizarre controls and finicky movement accuracy from the Kinect, your energy is a lot lower than it was when you started, you're sweating bullets, and you just physically cannot play anymore. And if you tried, you'd keep losing because of said fatigue. But that's not even close to the full extent of it. I recommended playing the tutorial earlier, but that doesn't guarantee success. It will just help you with the basics before getting into the game proper. I bring this up again because of the fact that once you're in the game, the rules change frequently. You'd think that the campaign is a series of races like the first 2 Riders games, and you'd be wrong. All 4 campaigns have 10 missions. The first 3 races see your team of choice against another team, like how Team Heroes starts off against Team Rose, and then does 3 races against Team Dark, and then 3 races with Team Babylon, and a final, 10th race with Sonic vs. Jet. These 10 races are spread across 3 maps, so you have to play the same track 3 times in a row at minimum, 4 times in the case of the last one. But then, you don't even race other characters for most of the runtime. Instead, you do miscellaneous missions that really try your patience. The first major bottleneck I hit when playing is this Knuckles mission in the ice level. You need to smash a certain number of icicles before crossing the finish line, and I thought this would be simple because in the first 2 games all you had to do was run into Destructibles as a power type character and then you'd hit them automatically. That is not how it works in Free Riders. Instead, you need to punch them yourself. I was so confused and spent 15 minutes on this mission that lasts like 1. That's because none of my punches were registering, and what had me so baffled was that I followed the instructions. The game had a prompt of a guy doing the punching with his right hand, so here I am doing right hook after right hook looking like a jackass, and it barely worked. So when I got to a similar mission as Storm in Team Babylon's story, I was terrified. But then, I learned that what this icon means is that you can only punch with your front hand, and whichever one that is correlated to whatever side of the board you're on. You also don't have to do a full-on hook, just a straightforward jab, and this had me utterly stunned.
Oh, sir, wait, what? It only works if you do it on the opposite side?
The whole switching sides mechanic was just so frustrating. Like previous games, different types have different shortcuts. Speed type characters grinding on rails, fly type characters going through these rings in the sky, and power type characters bashing through things. The problem is that Sonic, for example, can only grind when the player is facing right, but Jet, on the other hand, can only do it the opposite way. The game is already expecting so much of you at breakneck speed, but then you'll be Jet, see a grinding shortcut, and then you miss out on it because you didn't think to switch sides in order to get on the stupid thing. There were so many missions that pissed me off here. Like this one as Cream, where if your board runs out of energy, the mission ends. But the jumps I was doing weren't registering, so I kept failing over and over because I didn't have enough energy in my board to last. Or this mission with E10000B in Team Dark Story, where you have to target enemies with a missile power-up. Half the time, it wouldn't register my throws. Sometimes the missile would just hit the walls and not my targets, and then I'd run out of time. I kept trying to make precise shots, but then I gave up and started spamming the toss motion the second I got the missiles and won in like 10 seconds. What great and balanced difficulty. Side note, the power-ups in this game were also a headache and a half. The worst offender being this ball you have to toss where 9 times out of 10, you will hit yourself with the attack. And that literally happened to the guy at the E3 demo.
Bowling ball item. Hit myself with my own bowling ball there.
I mean, did no one think that was a terrible idea? Even making it possible to hit yourself with your own attack? But as I was saying, this game changes up the rules all the time. Like how you'll randomly be on a minecart and the controls are entirely different from the board, or landing in the water and riding a dolphin, but if you get back on land and then back in the water, you just die. Mother of all examples being the first mission with Vector and Team Rose. He rides a motorcycle and not a hoverboard, so the controls are completely changed, as you must place your hands in the air as if you were holding a bar. This mission requires you to maintain a certain speed for its entire duration. I'd get past the gate, go fast, and then I'd lean to turn only to have Vector completely stop and I'd fail the mission. I had no idea why this was happening, so I walked over to my game box to consult the manual. Despite having to lean while using a board, on a bike, where those rules would still make sense, leaning causes you to stop dead in your tracks. To turn on a bike, you must raise your left arm straight in the air and lower your right arm straight down to turn left, and vice versa to turn right. What an idiot I am for my inability to intuit that. This game is truly awful, and that goes for every aspect of it. Visually, its textures and models look low res, the anti-aliasing is poor with rampant screen tearing from start to finish. The game just looks more basic than Sonic 06, a game released 4 years earlier at this point which already didn't look great by early 360 standards. The music is good in this game, especially Free, the main theme, which has always been an earworm of mine whenever I hear it, but that's about the only nice thing I can say about the game. The weak production values carry over to the story as it's a wholesale downgrade from the previous games. You know, the ones on PS2 and Wii. I loved the cutscenes of Sonic Riders 1. It saw the cast being more expressive and cartoony than they usually are, and it was a lot of fun to watch. I criticized the story presentation in Zero Gravity as none of that charm was in the sequel. Instead, its characters mostly stood around talking, a trope I really don't like as has been discussed numerous times before. But that's eons better than Free Riders, where we get cutscenes that look like the ones from Sonic Rush on DS. A bunch of character PNGs that they switch through with voice acting on top of it. To give it some more life, they add this blue filter over it to make it look like a TV, and it's just so bad and low budget. But these cutscenes became my lifeline while playing, as it served as my only relief from the terrible gameplay. I also laughed several times because this was the first game to feature the 2010s voice cast, and Shadow, as I'm sure you know, was reinterpreted in the 2010s to be an utter asshole and just cracked me up with his Dracula voice.
Pageantry aside, we're here to win. You can be sure of that.
I'm impressed, Shadow. You guys managed to beat Jet and his gang.
Did you really think that we would lose? We were just waiting for your circus performance to end. We're ready.
Although to be fair to Shadow, most of the characters are really annoying and cynical in this game, so I can't fault him specifically. For once. The story was absolute hoopla in this game, but that also entertained me quite a bit. What happens is that Eggman, under his new fake name, King Doc, opens the new X-World Grand Prix so Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles join, the Babylon Rogues join, Amy and Cream enlist the help of a money-hungry Vector to play, because this was back when Big was hated and not a meme, so he was borderline banned from the series, and then Shadow and Rouge, who obviously have no friends or regard for anyone but themselves, just drag some random blue robot that barely functions off the street to be their third member. Surprise, surprise, this was another scheme of Eggman's, but the blue robot that Shadow and Rouge dragged in by complete random chance was actually Metal Sonic in disguise! collecting data on the heroes while they raced so Eggman could be the best racer. And I got a laugh out of how Eggman was the most surprised by the Metal Sonic reveal. As Sonic aptly says,
Wait, how did Eggman not know it was him already?
but it turns out, oh no, Metal Sonic sent Eggman fake data so he'd fail and then he could race Sonic, and then that fails and everyone laughs at how stupid this plan was.
Yeesh, my job would be easier if you shot down your own plots like this more often.
But at least they had fun. I mean, what the hell kind of story is that? It's just random nonsense for the whole runtime. The 4 campaigns don't even play off each other like they do in SA1, 2, Heroes, 06, and the first 2 Riders games. Each campaign is like its own universe where that team wins the whole thing, followed by a completely unnecessary last story mode. Now, that's another thing with this game, it goes on forever. In the first 2 games, both campaigns had 6 races and then a final boss with Sonic at the end of the second campaign. Free Riders has 4 campaigns with 10 missions each and then a last story with 3 races on the same track that goes on for like 6 minutes. I did not care. I pushed through all the physical pain this game put me through and powered my way to the end. I was cracking jokes when I started playing the game, but by the end, I was dead silent as I knew the end was in sight and I just had to keep putting up with the game for a little longer so I could say I fully completed the story mode of Sonic fucking Free Riders. And I did it. And when the game ended, I could only conclude the obvious. This is one of the worst games I have ever played in my life. You know what? Forget the modesty, Sonic Free Riders is the worst game I have ever played in my life. Think about it. What do basically all video games have in common? From the Pac-Mans and Galagas of the world all the way to DMC5 and Breath of the Wild. Some kind of skill mastery of the challenges put in front of you as the game escalates in difficulty. Whether that challenge be timing, reaction time, dexterity, deductive skills, or puzzle solving. I've never seen a game fail at this so consistently quite like Sonic Free Riders. Seriously. It's a game where the mechanics barely work. It's a crapshoot if your inputs will be recognized at all, in addition to them not being that fun anyway, because the game is liable to leave you physically in pain and dripping with sweat, desperately in need of a shower, like me after finishing it.
Dude, that was the worst game I've ever played in my life. I mean, it defies comprehension, it's so bad, so let's just cut to the voiceover and have that be the end of that.
We're dealing with a game that is frustrating beyond belief simply because of how bad the controls are and how unreliable the motion element of it is. When doing the most basic moves in a game is anyone's guess as to whether or not it's going to work, that game is not looking at a good review. No way in hell. This is a new low for my channel. I've never played a game as poorly communicated, as obnoxious, or as sub-functioning as Sonic Free Riders, and I have certainly never walked away from a game feeling physically unwell. I don't score things I review, I don't think it's necessary, but if you were curious, I look at all these games in various tiers, ranging from S tier at the top, and then A tier, B tier, C tier, D tier, and E tier at the bottom. To quickly explain, an S tier game is where I'd put games I could play until the moon turns blue. Any problem I could bring up is purely a nitpick because the game is just so good. An A tier game is great, just with a couple things here and there I might take issue with that keeps it from being an all-time favorite. A B tier game is just a good game. It's not perfect, not something I'd want to play every day, but it's good. Definitely something you'd come back to without hesitation if you had to or just simply felt like it. A C-tier game is one that I think is largely okay, but is nothing special and not really worth coming back to often, but it can be played and enjoyment can be had either because of the good elements it does have or because its flaws aren't major enough to make it a bad game. A D-tier game is either a game that is very much unfinished but I do enjoy playing, or a game that I think is technically finished but is not something I enjoyed at all. We saw this a few weeks ago when I reviewed Resident Evil Code Veronica, a game I had a lot of issues with but was still plenty playable, I just didn't enjoy the experience. Lastly, you have an E-tier game. This is one that I think is just a straight up terrible game. A game that is either soul-suckingly boring or bafflingly bad or frustrating. Now, thanks to Free Riders, I have a new tier on the scale, the F tier. This is reserved for the lowest of the low, games that are so ass-tastic that they barely even count. The big rigs is the Superman 64s of the world, so bad that it is borderline unplayable. I've never reviewed an F-tier game before today, so it was quite the experience doing so, especially since it was one that was so physically demanding. Initially, I was going to say that at least Free Riders doesn't come with any stakes, like the series wasn't depending on this stupid racing game being good, but then again, the sad fact is this game did do one thing. It killed the Sonic Riders series. I love the first Sonic Riders. It's such a cool and unique take on the mascot platformer turned racing game with its futuristic vibe and badass tricks. It's so much fun. Zero Gravity might not be great by comparison, but it was at least functioning. Free Riders was so bad that we just never got another Riders game when the idea had so much potential. 2010 also saw the release of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, a much more standard kart racer, and that game got 2 sequels in the years that followed, while Sonic Riders got left in the dust over this stupid, gimmicky Kinect game. And that much I'll always hold against this piece of shit.
Now, of course, originally this is the part where the Free Riders review had gone into my announcing my future Sonic content plans, but now no such thing exists at this moment because all those videos have already been made. And with my basic point made, I'd say that's a good place to wrap this little video up. So, like always, I'll say thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, and one more thing. Look at those gloves. Those are the most realistic gloves I have ever seen in a game in my entire life. And it's the only good thing about the game, too.